Before we begin this powerful story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories with life-changing twists. Now, get ready, because what seemed like an ordinary arrival would soon turn into an unforgettable turning point. Sebastião stepped out of the Uber in front of the majestic Grand Palace Hotel, a leather hat on his head and an old suitcase in his hand. He wore a checkered shirt, jeans, and worn boots, a striking contrast to the luxury cars parked outside. As he walked forward with quiet confidence, the hotel staff simply stared. Not one of them moved to help him. To them, he was invisible, someone who didn't belong in a place like this. Inside the lobby, glances were exchanged, some curious, others clearly disdainful. But Sebastião didn't flinch. He walked through the grand doors with the calm dignity of a man who knows his worth, even when the world tries to tell him otherwise. The hotel lobby breathed luxury. The marble floors reflected the golden lights of the chandeliers, and the scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. Behind the polished mahogany counter, 3 receptionists in crisp uniforms welcomed guests with flawless smiles. But when Sebastião approached the counter, something shifted. The youngest receptionist, Carla, exchanged a discreet glance with her colleague. The warm, professional smile on her face faded into an awkward expression. A blonde clerk in his mid-20s pretended to be busy shuffling papers, avoiding eye contact. It was clear they had already judged him. Then the sound of measured footsteps echoed from the office behind the desk. Maurizio, the hotel manager, emerged like a director stepping onto a stage. His hair was slicked back, his gray suit tailored to perfection, his posture radiating arrogance. For 15 years, he had worked in luxury hotels, and he prided himself on instantly identifying who belonged and who didn't. His eyes scanned Sebastião from head to toe, like a machine calculating someone's worth. "Good afternoon," Sebastião greeted politely, removing his hat. "I'd like a room for 3 nights, please." Maurizio's smile didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile Sebastião had seen in banks, high-end stores, and fancy restaurants. A smile that had already judged and condemned him. "Of course, sir," Maurizio replied, pausing deliberately. "Do you have a reservation?" "No," Sebastião answered calmly. "I came straight from the countryside. I thought I could get a room today." Around them, conversations began to slow down. A well-dressed woman whispered something to her husband. A businessman in a navy blue suit stopped scrolling on his phone. The lobby's lively rhythm faded into a silent, expectant atmosphere. Maurizio typed on the computer with exaggerated slowness, each keystroke like the hammering of a nail meant to build a wall of humiliation. "Our rooms are a bit specific," he said, emphasizing the word with thinly veiled contempt. "We only have suites available, $2,800 per night." He pronounced the price like a final sentence, expecting Sebastião to flinch, apologize, or admit he was in the wrong place. But Sebastião didn't even blink. "That's fine," he said simply. "Book it for 3 nights." For a brief moment, Mauricio's mask cracked. His confident expression faltered, only to return with an even more cynical smile. He leaned slightly over the counter, asserting his control like a predator sizing up his prey. "You understand we'll need guarantees, right? Credit card? Proof of income?" His voice grew louder so that everyone could hear. "Our guests usually belong to a certain standard." The words sliced through the air like a knife. Conversations halted completely. A heavy, awkward silence settled over the room. Mauricio could feel the eyes of the lobby on him, and he liked it. This was his stage. Sensing that he had an audience, Mauricio decided to push things further. He straightened his suit, leaned closer to Sebastião, and spoke with a cruel, almost playful tone. "You know what, my friend?" he said, savoring each word. "If you can pay for the cheapest room, I'll give you the suite, for free." The impact was immediate. A wealthy woman gasped, covering her mouth. Two businessmen exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young couple near the elevator paused their conversation. Even some employees looked uneasy, but no one dared to intervene. Maurizio had crossed a dangerous line. What was once silent prejudice was now open. Public humiliation. He expected chuckles of complicity, maybe even a few discreet nods of approval. Instead, he was met with frowns and tense silence. But Sebastião didn't lose his composure. His eyes, seasoned by life's hardships, met Mauricio's with a quiet steadiness that only irritated the manager more. "How much is the cheapest room?" Sebastião asked, his voice firm and without a hint of shame. Mauricio chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound that echoed through the reception. 800 reais, he said, certain that this little theater was about to end in his favor. What he didn't know was that this was the moment his entire plan would begin to unravel. Mauricio repeated the amount slowly, savoring every syllable. 800? Cash, of course. We don't do installments here. The word installments was laced with so much disdain, it almost tainted the elegant air of the lobby. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A blonde executive waiting on a sofa exchanged a significant glance with her colleague, silently acknowledging the ugliness of the scene. But Sebastião didn't flinch. He stood there, hat in hand, eyes locked on Mauricio's. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just a serene certainty that unnerved the manager more than any outburst ever could. "All right," Sebastião replied calmly. "I accept your challenge." Mauricio blinked twice, caught off guard. He had expected excuses, pleading, or an embarrassed retreat. Anything but this. "You accept?" he stammered, his voice a half-tone higher. "Yes," Sebastião confirmed, his tone unwavering. "If I pay the 800 in cash, you'll give me the suite for free. That's what you said, isn't it?" The lobby was dead silent now. Even the staff had stopped pretending to work. All eyes were fixed on the unlikely showdown unfolding before them. Mauricio could no longer back down. He was too deep into his performance. "Perfect," Mauricio said with forced confidence. "But when you can't pay, you'll have to leave immediately. And please, use the back exit. We don't want any more inconveniences." The unnecessary cruelty of his last words made a few guests exchange disapproving looks. An older man muttered to his wife, "How rude," but Mauricio didn't notice. He was too intoxicated by his own arrogance to realize he was beginning to lose the crowd. Sebastião nodded and walked slowly toward a nearby sofa, placing his old leather suitcase on it. The movement caused a ripple through the lobby. Every head turned, following his every step as if watching a Western duel about to begin. "What are you doing?" Mauricio demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm just going to sit for a moment," Sebastião replied, settling down with the ease of a man in his own home. "I need to organize my documents." For the first time, a seed of doubt flickered in Mauricio's mind, but he quickly dismissed it. Impossible, he thought. A man dressed like that? Arriving by Uber? No way he has that kind of money. The sound of the zipper echoed through the silent lobby like a drum announcing the start of a duel. All eyes were fixed on Sebastião as he calmly opened his worn leather suitcase. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. A few simple clothes, organized documents, a weathered leather pouch, and a brown envelope. Mauricio tried to maintain his confident posture behind the counter, but his eyes betrayed a flash of curiosity, and something else he didn't want to admit: apprehension. Sebastião pulled out the envelope with deliberate calm, sat back down, and began to count what was inside. His hands moved with quiet precision, stacking bills methodically on the coffee table in front of him. "Oh my God," whispered a woman nearby to her husband. "He's counting money." The news spread through the lobby like fire through dry grass. Heads turned, conversations stopped. Some guests even discreetly pointed their phones to record the unfolding scene. Mauricio felt the first real crack of pressure. His palms began to sweat. But he raised his voice across the reception, trying to regain control. "Money alone isn't enough," he barked. "You'll need proper documentation. ID, proof of income, CPF, everything." Sebastião looked up for the first time since opening his suitcase. A soft, almost fatherly smile appeared on his face. "Don't worry, young man," he said gently. "I have everything right here." The word "young man," spoken with such effortless kindness, completely threw Mauricio off balance. How could this man remain so calm, so dignified, in the face of humiliation? He returned to the counter holding a tidy stack of bills and a worn leather wallet. His footsteps echoed like a slow, inevitable drumbeat. 800 reais, Sebastião said, placing the cash on the counter as naturally as if he were ordering a cup of coffee. "Count it!" The lobby erupted into a low wave of murmurs. Mauricio stared at the pile of bills like it was a venomous snake. His humiliation act had just taken a serious turn. Mauricio leaned over the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he examined the stack of bills. The crisp notes of $50 and $100 lay there, perfectly counted and organized. This is 800? He asked, his voice sharper and higher than before. "Exactly," Sebastião replied calmly, pulling out his worn wallet. "And here are my documents as well." He handed over his ID, CPF, and driver's license with the same quiet confidence he'd carried since walking through the hotel doors. Mauricio took them reluctantly, his fingers slick with nervous sweat. He glanced at the name, Sebastião Mendonça da Silva, 54 years old, Uberaba, Minas Gerais. Everything looked ordinary, but the money sitting right in front of him told a different story. Carla, the young receptionist, moved closer to get a better look. A couple of employees strategically positioned themselves to watch what was happening. What had started as a moment of routine humiliation had transformed into a tense, public spectacle. Mauricio swallowed hard, trying to regain some of his earlier arrogance. "Where did this money come from?" he asked loudly, his tone accusatory. The question cut through the lobby like a gunshot. Guests turned fully toward the counter. A female executive lowered her phone mid-email. A pair of businessmen stopped talking altogether. Even the cleaning staff had paused their work to watch. Sebastião didn't flinch. He smiled again, softly, almost paternally. "It's honest money, young man, earned with the sweat of my work." "What kind of work?" Mauricio pressed, desperate to find a crack. "I'm a farmer," Sebastião replied simply. A few guests let out small, awkward laughs. Mauricio exhaled in relief, convinced he'd found his explanation. "A farmer," he repeated mockingly. "Right. Probably sold a few cows and thinks he belongs in a luxury hotel." His condescending tone echoed across the marble floors. A man in a navy blue suit muttered to his wife, "How disrespectful," but Mauricio, trapped in his own arrogance, didn't notice. "I came for the auction," Sebastião said, his tone still steady. Mauricio frowned. "What auction?" "The elite breeder auction," Sebastião replied. "It's happening tomorrow at the convention center." Mauricio squinted, trying to process the information. He didn't know much about cattle auctions, but he imagined small rural gatherings, certainly nothing connected to the kind of wealth that stayed in his hotel. "And how much are you planning to spend at this auction?" he asked, his voice dripping with irony. "It depends on the animals available," Sebastião answered casually. "But I brought enough for some good breeders." "How much does one of these breeders cost?" Mauricio sneered. Sebastião paused, as if calculating. "It varies. Hundreds of thousands. Sometimes even millions, depending on the lineage." The sentence hit the lobby like a small bomb. Conversations hushed. Several guests lowered their phones, listening intently. Carla's eyes widened slightly. Mauricio laughed loudly, a forced, mocking sound. You're telling me a bull costs millions of reais? And you plan to buy several? Yes, Sebastião replied without hesitation. Mauricio shook his head as if dealing with a lunatic. My friend, you arrived here in an Uber, dressed like this. He gestured disdainfully toward Sebastião's simple clothes. And you expect me to believe you're going to spend a fortune on cattle? I'm not asking you to believe anything, Sebastião replied, his calm voice now carrying a subtle weight. I just want the room you promised. Mauricio leaned forward, trying to intimidate him. Listen here, farmer. This is a serious hotel. We deal with serious people and serious money, not stories about millionaire bulls. The atmosphere grew tense. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. A woman whispered to her husband, "He's going too far." Sebastião pointed at the cash on the counter. The money is right there. And you made a bet. A man of his word keeps his promises. A man of his word? Mauricio repeated mockingly. A man of his word doesn't make up fairy tales to feel important. Then Sebastião did something no one expected. He reached into his suitcase, pulled out an old smartphone, and asked politely, "May I make a call?" "To who?" Mauricio asked suspiciously. "To my accountant. He can clarify a few things." Mauricio hesitated. The situation was slipping out of his control, but he was in too deep to retreat now, not with the entire lobby watching. "Go ahead," he said, trying to sound confident. "But when this little story falls apart, you're out." Mueli, Sebastião nodded, dialed a number, and placed the phone on speaker for everyone to hear. The phone rang twice. Then a clear, professional voice answered on speaker. "Good afternoon, Sebastião. How's the event in the capital going?" "Good afternoon, Dr. Roberto. I'm doing well, thank you," Sebastião replied with his usual calm. "May I ask you a quick question about tomorrow's preparations?" The entire lobby leaned in unconsciously. Even the bellboy froze mid-step, listening. "Of course," the accountant responded. "Could you remind me of the budget we set aside for tomorrow's auction?" Sebastião asked. The accountant's voice echoed crisply across the marble floor. "Certainly, Sebastião. We have a considerable reserve prepared for the bids. You wanted enough margin to secure the most important acquisitions." A wave of silence swept through the lobby. Mauricio's face stiffened. The accountant's tone was serious, respectful, the kind of tone no one could fake easily. "And payments?" Sebastião continued. "Same as always," the accountant replied. "Bank transfer or PIX for major transactions, and you have the corporate card for smaller expenses." "Thank you, Dr. Roberto," Sebastião said warmly. "Talk soon." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket as if nothing unusual had happened. The silence was absolute. Guests stared at him with renewed eyes. This wasn't some random man spinning stories. His accountant's confident answers had shifted the entire atmosphere. Mauricio's complexion had paled. His hands trembled slightly on the counter. The ground beneath his arrogance was starting to crack. That proves nothing," he stammered, desperately trying to regain control. Anyone could pretend to be an accountant. The accusation was so weak, so desperate, that it triggered whispers of disapproval among the guests. A businesswoman shook her head. A man in a tailored suit muttered to his wife, "Embarrassing." Sebastião smiled softly, but now there was a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "You're right," he said gently. "Words alone don't prove much. How about something more concrete?" Sebastião calmly returned to his old suitcase and pulled out a black leather folder. From it, he took a neatly folded stack of papers and walked back to the counter with quiet authority. He laid the documents in front of Mauricio. "Bank statement." "Last week," he said simply. Mauricio hesitated before picking them up. His hands were damp with sweat, and the papers slipped slightly between his fingers. As his eyes scanned the numbers, his expression changed instantly. The account balance began with a 7-digit number starting with 3. And the transaction history: transfers of hundreds of thousands of reais, equipment purchases worth more than luxury cars, supplier payments that screamed legitimacy. Mauricio blinked once, twice, a third time. He reread the numbers as if they might magically change. This must be fake," he muttered, but his voice no longer carried conviction. "You can call the bank and confirm," Sebastião offered naturally. "I even have my manager's card here if you'd like." The offer was so calm, so genuine, that Mauricio felt his knees weaken. He glanced around the lobby. Dozens of eyes were fixed on him, their expressions ranging from disbelief to judgment. Then, just as his humiliation was peaking, the main lobby doors opened. A well-dressed couple entered, he in an immaculate Italian suit, she in a designer dress. Their presence commanded attention. The man walked straight to the counter but froze when he sensed the tension in the air. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Mauricio and Sebastião. Mauricio saw a lifeline. "Just a small misunderstanding, Dr. Henrique," he said with a strained smile. "Nothing serious." But when Dr. Henrique turned to look at Sebastião, his eyes lit up with recognition. "Sebastião! Sebastião Mendonça!" he exclaimed. Sebastião turned, surprised, and his face broke into a genuine smile. "Dr. Henrique, what a pleasant surprise!" The two men shook hands warmly and embraced like old friends, their familiarity radiating through the room. Mauricio stood frozen, watching his world collapse in slow motion. The lobby's atmosphere shifted immediately. The man Mauricio had humiliated just moments ago was now being greeted like an old friend by one of the hotel's most distinguished guests. "How are things?" Dr. Henrique asked with genuine enthusiasm. "I heard you made some impressive acquisitions at the last auction in São Paulo." "I managed to get a few interesting breeders," Sebastião replied modestly. "Their genetics will make a real difference in the herd." Mauricio felt the blood drain from his face. The words, the familiarity, the mutual respect. It was like watching his entire perception shatter in real time. The guests who had been silently observing were now fully engaged, some exchanging knowing glances, others smiling as if justice was unfolding before their eyes. "And what about the Arabian horses?" Sebastião asked playfully. "Still breeding them?" "Always," Dr. Henrique replied, his eyes lighting up. "In fact, I have a colt that might interest you, son of one of my finest sires. Remember Al-Rashid?" "Of course I do," Sebastião answered with a grin. Their casual conversation, full of insider knowledge, prestigious names, and high-value references, echoed like a symphony of truth through the lobby. Every word was a blow to Mauricio's pride. Dr. Henrique finally turned to the manager, his friendly demeanor fading into stern authority. "Mauricio," he said slowly, "I hope you're treating my friend with the respect he deserves." Of course, Doctor." "Henrique," Mauricio stuttered. "We were just sorting out some details of his stay." "What details?" Dr. Henrique asked, suspicion in his voice. Sebastião, still composed, stepped in gently. "The young man here made a bet with me," he explained. "If I could pay 800 reais cash for the cheapest room, he'd give me the suite for free." Dr. Henrique's expression hardened. "You made a bet with Sebastião Mendonça?" The way he pronounced the name, with reverence, was like a hammer striking the last nail in Mauricio's coffin. I didn't know," Mauricio muttered weakly. "Didn't know what?" Dr. Henrique pressed. His voice now carried the weight of a man used to commanding respect. Dr. Henrique took a step closer to the counter, his gaze fixed firmly on Mauricio. His voice lowered, but every word carried a sharp, unmistakable authority. You didn't know you were talking to one of the most respected cattle breeders in the entire country? Maurizio shook his head slowly, looking smaller with each passing second. The entire lobby was silent again, but this time the energy was different. It wasn't awkward curiosity anymore. It was collective judgment. Guests exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others smiling subtly as they realized they had witnessed a powerful reversal. Dr. Henrique gestured toward Sebastião, speaking to the growing audience almost as if giving a public introduction. Allow me to properly introduce him. This is Sebastião Mendonça da Silva, owner of Val do Ouro Farm, a leading name in elite cattle breeding. His work has been featured in national reports. His auctions move figures that most people here can't even imagine. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman sitting on the sofa whispered to her husband, Vale do Ouro. Isn't that the farm that's always on the agribusiness news? Exactly, Dr. Henrique confirmed, clearly satisfied that the truth was setting in. Mauricio's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the counter. He had spent the last half hour humiliating a man whose name commanded respect in circles he couldn't even dream of entering. Sebastião stood quietly beside them, not boasting, not rubbing it in, just existing in his calm dignity, the same way he had when he first walked through the door. Dr. Henrique turned to the manager one final time. I sincerely hope you understand the gravity of the mistake you've made, he said coldly. Mauricio could only nod. His earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a pale, trembling silence. Mauricio's facade had crumbled. The confident, arrogant manager who once looked down on Sebastião now stood exposed before the entire lobby, pale, nervous, and stripped of authority. Every guest had become a silent witness. Some crossed their arms, others stared with a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. Dr. Henrique's eyes narrowed. Mauricio, he said in a low, firm voice, a hotel of this standard cannot afford employees who judge clients by appearances. What you did was unacceptable. The words hit like a slap. Mauricio tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I didn't mean to disrespect. I thought he... You thought wrong, Dr. Henrique cut him off sharply. And you did it loudly, in front of everyone. Sebastião, standing calmly at the counter, finally spoke. His tone wasn't bitter. It was measured, almost kind. Young man, there's a difference between serving people and judging them. I came here peacefully, just like anyone else. What you chose to do was reveal more about yourself than about me. The lobby fell into a deep silence. Even the sound of distant elevators seemed to pause. Mauricio lowered his gaze. The man he had mocked now stood in quiet strength, surrounded by people who had witnessed the entire downfall of his arrogance. A guest in the corner whispered to his wife, "He'll never live this down." Another murmured, "Justice, poetic justice." Mauricio's shoulders slumped. The weight of public humiliation pressed down on him like a stone. His earlier cruelty had turned into his own undoing, right before everyone's eyes. Sebastião took a slow breath, resting his hand lightly on the counter. His expression carried no anger, no desire for revenge, just the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to prove anything. He turned slightly so that his words carried through the lobby. You see, he began calmly, wealth isn't always dressed in suits or driving luxury cars. Sometimes it wears jeans and boots. Sometimes it arrives in an Uber. Respect should never depend on appearances. His voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room. Every guest, receptionist, and staff member listened. Some nodded subtly, as if absorbing a truth they already knew but had just witnessed in action. I've met simple people with golden hearts, Sebastião continued. And I've met powerful people with empty souls. How you treat someone before you know who they are says everything about you. Mauricio stood frozen, his head slightly bowed. Each word struck deeper, not as an attack, but as an undeniable mirror. Sebastião then looked him directly in the eyes. "Young man, humility doesn't cost anything, but arrogance can cost you everything." The lobby remained silent. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just the weight of truth lingering in the air. "Doctor," Henrique crossed his arms, clearly impressed by Sebastião's composure. Guests exchanged quiet, meaningful glances. In that moment, the lesson landed harder than any punishment could have. Mauricio's arrogance had brought him low. Sebastião's dignity had elevated him higher than any luxury ever could. The tension in the lobby slowly melted into a profound, reflective silence. Guests who had initially watched out of curiosity now looked at Sebastião with genuine admiration. What began as an attempt to humiliate had turned into a public lesson in humility and respect. Dr. Henrique turned to Sebastião with a warm smile. "Come on, my friend," he said. "Let's get you settled into the best suite in the hotel. You deserve it." Mauricio stiffened but didn't protest. He couldn't. His earlier arrogance had been dismantled brick by brick in front of everyone. All he could do now was nod silently as Carla, the young receptionist, hurried to make the arrangements with a newfound sense of respect. Sebastião picked up his old leather suitcase and adjusted his hat. He didn't gloat. He didn't throw any triumphant remarks. He simply walked toward the elevator with quiet confidence, the same way he had walked in. As he stepped into the elevator, several guests gave him small nods, silent acknowledgments of what they had just witnessed. At the counter, Mauricio stood frozen, the reality of his actions weighing heavily on his shoulders. His downfall hadn't come from force, but from truth. Exposed in front of those he had once tried to impress. The elevator doors closed, and with that, the man they all underestimated left behind not just a powerful lesson, but a story that everyone in that lobby would remember for a very long time. Before this video ends, ask yourself, how often do we judge someone by what they wear, how they arrive, or what they look like? Respect isn't earned by appearances. It's a choice we make, every single day. So if this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe for more cinematic stories that touch the heart.